Welcome to the Dairy Good Dawgs, a place where we talk everything from the barn to the arch, and where conversations are all things dairy. The people, the science, and the stories behind the cows. Hi everyone, I'm Sophie Dupont, your host, and today I'm joined by Cristy Christie, the founder and former owner of Black Diamond Vermicompost on California's Central Coast. For more than 16 years, Cristy has been turning separated dairy solids into high-quality vermicompost on a commercial scale. Today, she consults with and mentors others interested in building a successful vermicomposting operation. Cristy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Sophie.
Yeah, I'm so glad we could finally have you on. I know we've been chit-chatting for so long, and people are excited to hear from you. So to kind of start us off, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about maybe your background? Because how did you first become interested in vermiculture? And then how did you eventually grow that into a business venture? I've been reading about you, and I'm so excited to hear your story.
Well, it is an interesting path. It wasn't a straight line by any means. I've been involved in several different businesses over the years, from hair and studio makeup to selling resort real estate.
What?
But
Wow.
yeah, I knew absolutely nothing about gardening, soil, or worms. But in 2008, the financial crisis really forced my husband and I to pivot. We were involved in both construction and real estate, and both were crashing. And around the same time, my sister had been researching vermiculture, and she was convinced that this was a profitable business venture. Had a long conversation with her, and, I decided it was just worth investigating. So I got a little worm bin, got some worms from a friend, and I felt like if I was going to do this on any kind of scale, I needed to answer three questions. Could I keep them alive?
Mm-hmm.
Did I even like them enough to become a producer? And why were people raving about worm castings? So, yeah, I was able to keep them alive. And man, those little critters got my attention and quickly impressed me with their recycling capabilities. This was amazing what they did. It wasn't long before I had enough vermicompost to use on a couple of little broccoli plants, but several others were going to have to grow without it. And this was going to answer my question, why were people loving worm castings?
Oh.
So over the next 3 months, the difference between these plants was just remarkable. The plants with the vermicompost were dark green, they were strong, they smelled like food, and they were virtually bug-free. And the other ones, while they were growing, they had a few brown spots, and they were not nearly as green. They weren't nearly as strong, and aphids started showing up. So something was going on here. Then we harvested the broccoli, and we ate it. And, oh my gosh, well, it never made it to the salad. We stood at the kitchen sink, and we're just eating it and marveling at the flavor. I mean, this was real food. So I needed to know what was going on a deeper level. And that curiosity took me to the vermiculture conference at North Carolina State University. That's where I started to learn about commercial vermicomposting. And by the time I came home from that conference, I knew I wanted to do this commercially, not on a little hobby scale. I had chosen my technology, which is called continuous flow-through methodology, which is really just a fancy name for a very large mechanized worm bed.
Okay.
I chose dairy manure, separated dairy solids as my feedstock, and I opened Black Diamond Vermicompost here on California's Central Coast. What really shaped the business came next. I started talking to gardeners, and I discovered an enormous amount of frustration. These people cared deeply about their gardens. They were spending money on fertilizers and soil amendments. They were trying different products, and they were often not very happy with their results. They were promised results, they didn't get them, and I saw this gap in the marketplace. At the same time, my niece was going to college, and she needed to do a feasibility study as one of her projects. So she chose the vermicomposting industry. Well, how convenient, right? So in order for her to get some data for her feasibility study, we developed a simple 5-question survey, and we spent weeks visiting garden clubs throughout our county and talking directly to the gardeners.
Oh.
That was the experience that changed everything. I learned gardeners. I learned what they were buying, what they were spending money on, what frustrated them, and probably most importantly is what they wanted.
Yeah.
They weren't necessarily looking for just another bag of fertilizer. They wanted something they could depend on. They wanted results. And they wanted someone they could trust to answer their questions. So at that point, the education and the product really became inseparable. So home gardeners became my niche and the foundation of my business. We weren't simply selling worm castings. We were producing a product that people could trust, and we did so by giving hundreds and hundreds of tours of our facility and educating them throughout the process. So that little broccoli plant ultimately grew into a thriving business. And last year, I sold Black Diamond Vermicompost to a young, energetic couple who have the opportunity to expand production and widen its reach. And today, I get to spend my time mentoring those who want to build a vermicomposting business, small or large, part-time, full-time, using the same methods and processes that proved successful for me over the last 16 years.
Wow, what a story. I love it. I love how, you kind of fell into something and then it became your whole life. I can really relate to that, falling into dairy and in college by just meeting someone in a class and then being like, okay, this is my future. This is where I want to be. So I love that. And I love how you combined, science and education to really produce something that people actually want. But even more than that, something that's actually helpful and not just, one of these gimmicks out here. Because I know a lot of people promise a lot of things, but I love how you went straight to the gardeners to actually ask, what do you all need? That's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, and what a group of people they are. They're just fabulous people. I love gardeners.
Me too. You know what? I don't have a huge green thumb. My tomato plants always die, but my family is, so I can agree with that. The armadillos also don't play a great role here in Georgia.
Pests.
I know. So my next thought is at the most basic level, I feel like we've heard about worms our whole life. They're under our feet, maybe played with them as kids. I'm guilty of that. But at the most basic level, what do worms need to thrive? What are the management practices that are most important to maintain a healthy and productive vermicomposting system? And even deeper than that, sorry, I'm just going into my science mode here. What's actually happening at the biological level when worms process this organic material?
Yeah, well, that is a deeper level. So I can address that on 2 levels. I'll start with composting worms, and I'll look at this answer through the eyes of somebody who wants to maybe start a small worm bin and feed worms kitchen scraps or something like that. There's thousands of species of worms. And so we're going to dial it down to compost worms for this particular conversation. And those would be red worms or red wigglers. They've got many, many nicknames. But they're worms that really like and do best at working through pure organic matter. They're not the kind of worm that burrow deep in the ground and we find on the sidewalks after a rain. That's a very different species.
Oh, okay.
So small home worm bin worms and kitchen scraps, well, worms kind of love the mid-range of temperature. So 50 to 75 degrees, that's their favorite place to live. It's mine too.
Valid.
And we give them lots of carbon materials like shredded cardboard, mixed well with kitchen scraps, and we create an environment that is loose for them to be able to move around in, aerate with air, and not compacted so that they can't move around. So we got to give them texture and things like that. If you just put in food scraps and it's really wet material, it's going to compact down, it's going to get mushy, and nobody's going to be happy. So we need to add that carbon to it.
Okay.
But besides that, we don't want the carbon to nitrogen ratio or the greens and browns to accidentally get the perfect balance to start hot composting right there in the worm bin.
Oh.
That's why we use a lot of carbon material to keep that balance to the carbon side so that it won't heat up on us.
Mm-hmm.
We need plenty of moisture. 70% is good. Worms don't like light at all, so it needs to be dark, needs to be still. They don't really want to be messed with, which is, sometimes hard for us to do because we want to see what they're doing.
Right.
And I'd say that the biggest problem that I see is overfeeding. A small worm bin with maybe a pound of worms, which is about 800 to 1,000 worms. If we give them about a cup of food and then don't feed them again until it disappears, we're not going to overfeed them. When you see a whole bunch of food scraps laying around in a worm bin, you know that you're asking for odors, you're asking for flies and ants. Of course, this depends on where the worm bin lives. Is it in the garage? Is it in your laundry room? Is it outside in the backyard? All of these places are going to play into what else can get invited to that table. And if you overfeed to an extent, then the worms are just going to try to escape.
Oh.
So recognizing that worms love microbes, they're actually not eating the apple core or the potato peel that we put in there. They're eating the microbes that are eating the apple core and the potato peel.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So to address your what's happening on the biological level, at the simplest level, vermicomposting is a partnership between earthworms and microbes. So the microbes are already breaking down the organic material. The worms consume that partially decomposed material with all the microorganisms living in that complete ecosystem. And as it passes through the worm's digestive system, it's broken down further and it's biologically transformed. The worm's digestive system is its own little biological environment, and the microorganisms are playing a very important role in that process. What comes out the other end is very different from what went in. The material's more stable, the nutrients have been transformed, and you have this incredibly active biological material that we call vermicompost, which is extremely helpful to build healthy soil. So I sometimes think of the earthworm as a little biological processing plant. It's like a bacteria factory. Material goes in one end, worms and microbes work on it together, and something much more valuable comes out the other end. It's loaded with plant growth hormones and regulators, all the stuff that plants need to grow strong and produce nutritious food loaded with flavor. And that's why many people call it nature's original fertilizer.
Ah, that's fascinating. I think that all of us think about our individual, at least in agriculture, all of our individual animal that we specialize or a crop, what have you, about the biological processes that are happening, on our side, what we specialize in, but we don't really think about, the biological processes of all of these other fantastic creatures. I mean, who knew that they were doing so much in the microbes? We talk about microbes in the dairy world, in the rumen and fermentation, but learning that the worms don't actually eat the physical food, fascinating. I had no idea.
I had no idea either. I mean, this has been a fabulous journey to learn all of this from just an observation level and a scientific level along the last 16 years.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I'm learning so much. I'm going to delve into worms after we wrap this up because I'm now fascinated. So thinking about worms and thinking about all that they do, and then specifically about dairy operations, where do you see maybe the greatest opportunities for producers to incorporate vermicomposting into their systems or creating a system? How can producers integrate these systems into their existing manure management or maybe their crop growth programs? I'm interested.
Okay. Well, when I think specifically about dairy operations, I think the greatest opportunity really may be collaboration. We're talking about livestock here, and worms, just like cows, require expertise and attention. Commercial vermicomposting is not simply a matter of putting worms into manure and letting them go to work. There's a whole production system behind it. There are decisions about feedstock preparation, moisture, temperature, consistency, harvesting, product quality, and ultimately what happens to the finished vermicompost. Dairy producers already have their own area of expertise. They know cows, milk production, herd health, manure management, and all the complexities that come with running a dairy.
Right.
Someone who's passionate about vermicomposting isn't necessarily interested in milking cows. And a dairy producer most likely has no interest in becoming a worm farmer. They've got full-time jobs.
Right.
And I think that's perfectly fine. I mean, both are legitimate agricultural enterprises, but they require very different skills and knowledge. So maybe rather than asking, how do we turn dairy farmers into vermicomposters, a more interesting question is, how do we get these two industries to work together? I would love to see commercial vermicomposting operations established near dairies, close enough that moving the manure or separated dairy solids is practical and economical. Transportation matters. If we're trying to solve or improve a manure management, then we don't want to create another problem by hauling this material long distances.
Right.
The dairy can provide a consistent, locally available feedstock. The vermicomposting operation can provide the expertise and the infrastructure to properly pre-compost that material, feed it to worms, manage the production process, and turn it into a consistent, high-quality finished product. Then you begin to create some really interesting possibilities. That vermicompost goes back into ag through crop production, pastures, orchards, nurseries, and gardens. Now you have taken what began as a manure management challenge and turned it into a locally produced soil amendment with economic value. But I think there's even bigger opportunity here, and that's research. If universities and dairies, vermicomposting producers, and growers were all working together, these operations could really become living laboratories. We could conduct more crop trials. We could look at different application rates, building soil health, plant response, water usage, nutrient cycling, and the characteristics of vermicompost produced from dairy solids. We could collect real-world data over multiple growing seasons and hopefully generate good published research. This is a continuation of the regenerative ag and soil restoration movement we're seeing today. That benefits everybody. It gives vermicomposting industry better science. It gives dairy producers another potential avenue for managing manure and demonstrating environmental stewardship. It gives growers information they can actually use, and it gives the public an opportunity to see two ag industries working together rather than viewing manure simply as a waste problem. So to me, that's where the greatest opportunity lies. Not in asking the dairy producer to take on another entire profession, but in creating local partnerships where the dairy does what it does well, the vermicompost producers do what they do well, and together they create something that has environmental, agricultural, scientific, and economic value for the community.
I'm sold. I love that. Coming from a university perspective, I think we're always thinking about how can we make our research applicable to producers? Because if they can't do it, what's the point of testing it kind of thing. So I love this idea of the collaboration of so many parts and sectors of ag into, a university setting to actually produce some great research. I think you make a very good point, too. So many producers, I think people, maybe today, the general public doesn't understand, farmers as much as we would hope, thinking about how it's not only their business, but their whole life, their operation is not only their livelihood, it's their family history. It's such a point of pride for them, as well as, just financial means. So I think that thinking about, well, okay, these producers, whether it be dairy or vermicomposting, everybody has their own thing, but how can we create collaborations and how can we come together to ultimately better, ag as a whole? I love it. I think that's a fantastic idea.
Well, I'm glad you're in for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I had my own dairy farm. I'd be so in. But thinking about dairy solids, we think about manure management. That got me thinking while you were talking. Can you walk us through what happens, like when dairy solids are transformed into vermicompost, that process? Because, I was doing a little bit of research and we've chit-chatted a couple times and we talked about pre-composting and the changes in the nutrient profile. So how does that all affect soil health, plant growth? I mean, I'm just so fascinated on this awesome transformation.
Sure. As a commercial vermicomposter for over 16 years, I learned early on how incredibly important the pre-composting process was. I like to think of it as a biological progression from the cow through pre-composting, through the worm, and eventually back to the soil. So as you well know, a cow is a ruminant.
Yep.
So we begin with a material, separated dairy solids, that has already been through an incredibly complex microbial digestive system. The cow's digestive system is full of microbes, and it's driven by those systems. The dairy then separates the manure from the liquid. That leaves us, vermicomposters, with separated dairy solids, which is the fibrous material which, when pre-composted, makes an exceptional worm feedstock. But we don't feed it directly to the worms. Pre-composting is critical. Manure comes with pathogens. We know that. So we use an aerated composting system to take those solids through a thermophilic or hot composting phase. That does several important things. It releases initial heat energy, it reduces pathogens, it destroys weed seeds, but it also allows for microbial communities to continue developing. After a few weeks, the material's cooled, and that's what we call green compost. It's not finished compost. We don't want it to be.
Okay.
But now it's ready for the worms. And the worms and the microbes continue breaking it down and transforming that material into vermicompost. And in my systems, it would be the continuous flow through vermicomposters.
Right.
And by the way, vermi is Latin for worm, vermicompost. So now let me address the nutrient question you asked. Vermicomposting doesn't create nutrients that weren't there to begin with. It transforms the material so that the nutrients can become more available to plants. I sometimes compare plant roots to tiny little straws. The nutrient can be in the soil, but unless it's in a form that the plant can actually access, it doesn't do the plant much good.
Right.
And microbes play a really important role in making those nutrients available. That's the important distinction. You can have a pantry full of food, but if everything is locked in cans and you don't have a can opener, you're not having dinner.
Yeah.
So microbes are the can openers.
Ah, love it.
Coffee beans. Coffee beans are useless unless they're ground.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how much hot water you pour over whole beans, you're not getting a latte. So microbes are the grinders. They break those nutrients down into tiny particles that plants can sip. When you look at the entire process, it's really remarkable. We start with a material that a dairy needs to manage. We pre-compost it to make it safer, more stable, and more appropriate for worms. Then the worms and the microbes continue that biological transformation, and what comes out the other end simply isn't composted manure. It's stabilized. It's a biologically active soil amendment. But I think to me what's most remarkable is the fact that worm castings can't be synthesized, they can't be cultivated in a lab, and they can't be patented. The unique characteristics and qualities of worm castings only come from the worms themselves.
I mean, it's so true. Thinking about that process and how worms are able to create this fantastic product that truly is unique to them. I mean, the miracle of life. So cool. Hearing you talk about, separated solids and that pre-composting step, how vital it is fascinating to me, because one would think, you dump them in, you shut the thing, and the worms do the rest. But no, creating something that the worms and the microbes can work together on is fascinating. I think like that part of this process and the specifications that are needed to create something that is consumable for the worms and the microbes, I think is vital. That education piece that I love that you're doing, because, I think this is such an interesting thing that on a large scale or a small scale, people might want to try, but educating that, that this is a true biological process. There are steps that you need to follow to be successful, like anything else. That's fascinating.
It is. And I think the way people want to be talked to is at their level. And sometimes I find myself getting really sciencey about this. And we just like talking about bacteria and protozoa and nematodes and, all these things. And that's really not what people really want to learn. They just basically want to know, does it work? Is it consistent? What am I going to expect? And from that level, we try to keep it as simple as possible and not get too, over the heads in education.
Yeah, you make such a good point. I think in academia here, we struggle with that a lot, connecting with people, and you don't want to ever make someone feel like they're not a part of something or they're not going to understand, so why try? So I love that you're blending education with meeting people where they're at. I think that's fantastic. And that brings me to kind of my next thought. Thinking about this process and everything you have to do in order to get such a fantastic product, what are the most common challenges or misconceptions that you encounter when producers first begin kind of exploring vermicomposting or thinking about, okay, this is what I want to do with vermiculture. Here's what I've tried. Uh-oh, it didn't work.
Yeah, I think one of the big misconceptions is that vermicomposting is simple because worms eat everything.
Mm-hmm.
Put worms in manure, a bunch of food scraps and cardboard, throw in some leaves, wait a while, and you have vermicompost. Well, while that biology may be natural and on a very small scale, it would work very well, managing it successfully on a commercial scale requires knowledge and consistency.
Right.
Worms are livestock. They need the right environment. They need the right feedstock, the right moisture, temperature, and they need those things consistently. A worm bed can be very forgiving. Worms are resilient, but that doesn't mean we should continually ask them to adapt to changing conditions. I also think people underestimate the importance of designing the entire system, the business model, if you will. So, of course, I'm talking commercial scale here. It's not just where do I put the worms?
Right.
It's also where does the feedstock come from? Where and how is it pre-composted? What vermicomposting system should I use? Do I use rows? Do I use boxes, batches? What do I use for methodology? how will the finished vermicompost be harvested? Where does it go from there? Who's going to use it? So on a commercial scale, all these pieces have to get put together and they have to work together. So for someone exploring vermicomposting, they should respect the biology, but also respect the process. Worms do an extraordinary amount of the work for us, but we have to create the conditions that allow them to do it.
I think you make such a fantastic point that's applicable, not only to vermicomposting, but to, all other things as well. You make such a good point with the business plan. That's, I think, what we try and specifically stress to our undergrads here. It's great if you suggest something to producers, or if producers are trying to incorporate something new into their operation or even start up an operation, but truly they need to have all of these pieces before doing so. You're so right. Who is it going to go to? How are you going to get your product? How is it going to be distributed? What specific product are you going for? What style of system? I think that's so applicable to not only vermicomposting, but also dairy, thinking about the financial aspect, the labor aspect, thinking about, our livestock and their health and comfort and productivity and reproduction, all of these pieces. So I love that you mentioned that.
Well, thank you. When I started, there were a lot of raised eyebrows around me. It's like, what are you doing? And I felt the need to write a business plan. I didn't really know anything about the industry, and while my niece started me on this thing with the feasibility study, I could just sense with that little experience that something deeper was needed. So I wrote a business plan. It took me months, but I'm so glad I did. Number one, if I needed money, that's the first thing that somebody's going to ask.
Right.
It's like, where's your business plan?
Right.
So I felt like I needed to go through that process, and I did so, and I spent a lot of time. I took this business plan to 3 different institutions locally, and I said, if I need any funding, what would you do? And they read, all 3 of them read. I mean, I remember just like wrenching my hands the first time I had my plan in front of one of these bankers. And all 3 of them said, we will give you up to $250,000 on this business plan based on what we're seeing here. And I went, okay, I've got it dialed.
Yeah.
I know how to do it. I know the steps that are going to be needed to be taken. I hadn't taken the steps yet, but I knew that I could do it. And if I followed my own plan, then it would be workable and I would be supported.
I think that's such a good thing to remember for anyone, getting into any type of business, having your plan and having things mapped out, and then going to people and being like, hey, this is what I've got. Either where do I go from here? How do I acquire the funds, or what else can I do to strengthen what I already have? So I love that. That's fantastic. That reminds me of something that Dr. Bolin says, to take things in little bites and make yourself a plan.
Yeah.
So sometimes we boil things down here on the pod for specifically our region. So here in the Southeast, I know you are not in the Southeast, being as far away across the country as one could get. But here in the Southeast, I think our producers face, just like y'all's producers, certain regional, let's say, aspects that can make production of any kind challenging, or at least different. And so, here in the South, our producers face high temperatures, an immense amount of humidity, and a wide range of soil conditions. We're known for our Georgia red clay. We do have some, other range of soil, but we're known for that. So how do these, in your opinion, these environmental factors affect the feasibility and success of vermicomposting systems?
For me, the answer really is about controlling the environment rather than trying to adapt the worms to the environment.
Okay.
In my work, promoting vermicomposting systems, I promote those vermicomposting systems housed inside a building, particularly in areas like the Southeast.
Okay.
You have high temps, you have high humidity, And the production process needs to take place indoors, either in a conditioned or at least a semi-conditioned environment. So as we talked about earlier, our job is to create the conditions that allow the worms to do their work successfully.
Right.
And as mesophilic creatures, these little critters that like to live in the zone of the right temperature, if we're asking them to perform consistently, then that's one thing. We shouldn't be asking them to cope with extreme heat, direct sun, heavy rainfall, dramatic fluctuations, those kinds of things.
Okay.
So a building gives us much more control. We can manage temperature, we can manage airflow and feeding, those things much more consistently and successfully. And, consistency is important because it's a business.
Right.
As a producer, you need to know that the system is going to produce and perform in July just as reliably as it's going to in February or March. I don't see the Southeast climate as a barrier to vermicomposting at all.
Okay.
I see it as another reason to design the business correctly from the beginning.
Ah, okay, interesting. I think before we chatted and, when I was still researching things, I was thinking about putting, the worms directly into the fields, but you're right, it's not that at all. You're using this fantastic product that they're creating to then put onto the field. So really you make a good point. It doesn't matter, our temp fluctuations as long as you're keeping them hopefully indoors and then in a stable, environment. So that's a very good point, because I think that thinking about, a business model for any kind of livestock or production system, immediately here in the Southeast, kind of those alarm bells go up of like, temperature, humidity. But that's, not really going to be a factor here if you're doing it right.
If you're producing vermicompost, when you say putting worms in the soil, wherever we find worms naturally, wherever we're gardening and we see worms, we see them because they have something to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, clay soils, which we have our own version of clay here in the West, are so tight that it takes a lot of organic matter to be built up in those soils in order to have food for the worms.
Mm-hmm.
They need to feed on something, although it wouldn't be a compost worm species. It would be a different species of worm. But they've got to have something to eat, and they got to be in an environment to be able to be suitable for that species of worm. And I think that's, what you're kind of alluding to is that how do we get worms in our environment? In agriculture, when you finally get enough organic matter and have enough food sources for worms to actually be there naturally, what we can't do then is, of course, till. Because we'll cut them all up.
Right.
And that's a myth. You can't cut worms in two and make two worms.
No, that's terrible. I did, however, unfortunately think that for a very long time.
I don't know where it started, but it's a myth.
That's terrible. So, kind of to wrap us up here, if a dairy producer, let's say, they have everything, in their operation pretty squared away. They're looking to branch out their arms a little bit. If they wanted to start vermicomposting, what would a realistic step look like for them?
I really think the most realistic first step is collaboration.
Okay.
We talked about this a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
A dairyman is a specialist.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that expertise should be respected and honored. Running a dairy requires an extraordinary amount of knowledge, experience, and attention.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily think we should be asking that producer to become a vermicomposting specialist too.
Okay.
On the other hand, a commercial vermicomposter brings a very different set of skills. That person understands worms, biology, pre-composting, production systems, harvesting, product quality, marketing demographics, and ultimately how to turn those dairy solids into a valuable finished product. You put those two together, and I think you have something very powerful.
Yeah.
I really see the vermicomposter as potentially becoming a strong right arm to the dairy, not replacing the dairy's existing manure management program, but adding another valuable option to it. And that's why if a dairy producer called me tomorrow and said, "Where do I start?" my first question would not be, "Well, how many worms do you want to buy?" It would be, "Who can we bring to the table?" Because I think the greatest opportunity here isn't turning dairymen into worm farmers. It's bringing good dairymen together with good vermicomposters.
Ah, I love it. I love how much you champion collaboration. I think here in academia, we're trying to, at least I know myself, Dr. Bolin here at UGA, are trying to promote collaboration and really seek out those who are specialists in their field, because they have the experience and the wealth of knowledge that will only benefit, whatever project that we're working on. So I love that you are an advocate for collaboration. And you're right, dairy farmers are busy. They got enough on their plates. It's so true. And I mean, same with vermiculture producers, I am sure. It sounds like sounds like a whole ordeal. So I love that you are an advocate of bringing kind of these two pieces together. And it would be fantastic to see, vermiculture operations popping up near dairies and kind of this symbiotic relationship occurring between that.
Well, I think the cool part about this business too is it doesn't have to be full-blown, full-scale, full-time with employees.
Right.
I worked part-time for a few years all by myself with a commercial scale system, and I only worked 12 hours a week.
Wow.
So when you get the system dialed and you really know the moves that need to be taken, you can scale it. It can be full-time or part-time.
And that's such a good point, too, because, truly, I think that so many people are looking for kind of innovative things to do to create a second or third income. And if you're right, if they have the plan and they have the knowledge, education, going to a conference, kind of learning the industry, it would be fantastic for someone to start and scale it to their comfortability to meet their lifestyle. I just want to say, Cristy, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your experience and insights. It's fantastic to meet you and kind of just learn so much. I'm about to go research everything about worms.
Well, that's why I wrote a book.
Let me know when it comes out. I will be buying. That's fantastic. Yeah, is there anything you'd love to say about your book?
Yeah. I haven't settled on a title yet, but it's really the book that I wish I'd had when I started. It's written for someone who is seriously considering commercial vermicomposting or who's already started and wants to build a more professional, maybe scalable operation.
Right.
It's not really a book about how to raise worms. There's plenty of information available about that. The most reliable book on that level is The Worm Farmer's Handbook by Rhonda Sherman.
Okay.
She was the one who hosted the conferences at North Carolina State.
Yes.
My book is about how to build the business around the worms. Choosing the production method, finding the right feedstock, designing the facility, understanding your market, making the decisions that determine whether the operation can actually be efficient and profitable. So I share what worked for me, what didn't, the lessons I learned over many years of building Black Diamond. And my hope is that someone can take that experience, adapt it to their own goals, and avoid some really expensive mistakes that I made.
Congratulations on your book.
Thank
you. I can't wait to read it when it comes out, so email me.
I will. And thank you for this opportunity, Sophie. It's very important to me, and I appreciate you reaching out and us doing this. This is great.
Of course. I'm so glad. We're so happy to have you on. I think it's fantastic to incorporate not only, other parts of ag, but parts that tie into the dairy industry. So I know that people will be excited to listen, and going back when I edit, I will also be excited to re-listen and continue to absorb things. But, thank you so much for coming on and for talking to me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Well, it's been so interesting to learn how the creatures we often overlook that are beneath our feet can help transform dairy solids into a valuable resource for soil health and crop production. I think conversations like this really highlight how producers can continue to find innovative ways to make the most of resources that are already available on their farms, and how different sectors of agriculture can collaborate successfully to benefit both producers. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who might enjoy learning about vermicomposting and the unique ways worms turn waste into valuable resources. Thank you for joining us, and tune in next time for more from the Dairy Good Dawgs, because every great glass of milk starts with great people.